Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at this problem right here, which states a group of 50 high school math concentration students are comparing how many of their 3 different math exams, algebra, geometry, and calculus, they passed at the first attempt. You are given the following information. 56 students passed geometry at the first attempt. 58% of students passed calculus at the first attempt. 19 students passed both geometry and calculus at the first attempt, and 2 students did not pass any exam at the first attempt. And now they're asking, calculate how many students passed only the algebra exam at the first attempt. So feel free to pause this video and give this problem a go. Alright, so now I'm going to go over the solution with you guys. So it says a group of 50 high school math students basically took 3 tests, algebra, geometry, and calculus, and they gave us the following statistics right here. And they're asking us how many students passed only the algebra exam. Why did they say this only, you might ask? Well, they said this only because you can see in part 3 it says 19 students passed both geometry and calculus at the first attempt. So that's why they want to specify the individuals who only pass the algebra exam. They don't want us to find the number of individuals who pass both algebra and geometry or algebra and calculus. They only want us to find the number of students who passed algebra. So that out of the way, how do we approach this problem? Well, I like to approach this problem whenever we have some sort of intersection, because I know there's some sort of intersection over here, and then union, I'm sure there's here somewhere. I like to approach the problem by drawing a model such as this. So here are 3 circles, not my best form of artwork, but it will do. So this circle will represent how many individuals pass geometry, this circle will represent how many individuals pass calculus, and this circle will represent how many individuals pass algebra. So basically what we're trying to find is this part, right? How many individuals only pass algebra. Now, in order to find how many students actually pass algebra, we need to understand this diagram a little bit more. So over here will be how many students only passed geometry. Only passed geometry, meaning that they either didn't take calculus and algebra or they failed calculus and algebra and only passed geometry. This one, same thing. You're only going to write the number here for the number of students who passed only calculus, not geometry or algebra. What you're going to write over here are the number of students who pass both geometry and calculus, which we could see in this third statistic. This one are students who pass both geometry, calculus, and algebra. What you write over here are individuals who pass both the geometry and algebra test. And over here, you write individuals who pass both the calculus and algebra test. So now that we have a good hand of what exactly do these little boxes represent, it is time to actually start filling them, which is kind of the fun part in my opinion. So let's start with statistic number 1. 56% of students pass the geometry test at the first attempt. So here there's nothing like geometry and another subject, another algebra or calculus. So we're going to put it right there because it's just saying, well, 56 students passed geometry at the first attempt. That's all they're saying. They're not saying it's colliding with something else. They're just saying 56% of the students passed geometry at the first attempt. Well, we know the total number of students, which is 50. So in order to find the total number of students who passed geometry at the first attempt, you would simply do 0.56 times the total number of people who took the test, which is 0.56 times 50, which is 28. So 28 people, 28 students passed geometry at their first attempt. Now moving on to statistic number 2. So we're done with statistic 1. Statistic number 2 states 58% of the students passed calculus at the first attempt. So this is somewhat like statistic number 1, except now they're talking about calculus instead of geometry. So it's going to go right there. Now, how do we find the actual number of students who pass calculus as an actual number, not a percentage? Well, same thing like we did over here. This would be 0.58 times 50, which is 29. So 29 individuals passed the calculus test. Now, we are done with statistic number 2. Now let's move on to statistic number 3. 19 students passed both geometry and calculus at the first attempt. So when I get something when it says both and, well, I like to think, let's go back to our diagram and let's see, when we find out, well, it says 19 students, where are we actually going to put these 19 students? Considering that they passed both geometry and calculus. So we can already kind of not even care about this part, right? Because that's algebra. Nowhere in this statistic it says anything about algebra. So we're just looking at geometry, this part, and calculus. So 19 students passed both geometry and calculus, meaning that it would go over here because it's overlapping between the geometry circle and the calculus circle. So we are simply going to put 19 over there. Now we're done with statistic number 3. Now it says for statistic 4, 2 students did not pass any exam at the first attempt. Well, where does that leave us? Well, it's kind of irrelevant at this point because we know 2 students did not pass any exam at the first attempt. So that means out of the 50 high school students that took this exam, only 48 students passed in the first attempt. So 48 students passed in the first attempt. So essentially we're only considering this 48 over here. The reason I multiplied by 50 is that it says 56% of the students. So it's talking about all the students. That's why I took 50. Here I'm just saying that only 48 students passed in the first attempt because that's essentially all I can get out of statistic 4. All right, so we have all our information from the statistics. Now let's see what we can actually do with this information and what we can analyze, what we can get from this. So the number of students who passed geometry or calculus, we have to find that out. So when I say geometry or calculus, what does that exactly mean? Well, let me write that down. So what I mean when I say students who pass geometry or calculus is that students who pass either or. So a student who either passed geometry but maybe failed calculus, or a student who either passed calculus or failed geometry, that would be considered geometry or calculus. But we don't know geometry and calculus. All we know is that 28 people passed geometry and 29 people passed calculus. It does not say that these 28 people failed calculus and these 29 people failed geometry. No. And we can see that. We see that 19 of the people passed both geometry and calculus. And this 19 is included in this calculus section, meaning that this 19 is still part of the calculus and this 19 is also still part of geometry. So 19 applies to both geometry and calculus, meaning that 19 students passed both the geometry and calculus test. However, this 28 and 29 means that 28 individuals passed the geometry test and 29 individuals passed the calculus test. So if we want to find how many individuals passed either geometry or calculus, we can simply add these two together, 28 plus 29. However, when we add these two together, we're essentially overcounting because this already include individuals who pass both tests. So instead, we're overcounting 19 individuals who passed both tests. So instead, we have to subtract 19 to compensate for that, and then you get 38. So 38 individuals passed the geometry or the calculus test. Now, this is where this 48 students passed in the first attempt come pretty handy. We know 48 students passed in the first attempt, and out of those 48 students, 38 passed geometry or calculus at the first attempt. So how do we find the number of students who passed algebra in the first attempt? Well, if 48 students were in total who passed in the first attempt, excluding those two because those two are irrelevant, 48 students passed in the first attempt, and we already know that, 38 students passed geometry or calculus. That's basically considered the same category. What we're going to be left with is the number of students who passed algebra. Only algebra. Now, there are 10 students who passed only algebra.